everybody, how's it going? Welcome back to Reading in the Dark. Byron here. So this video is going to be my pretty simple, pretty straightforward, probably not that long, wrap up for Thriller-A-Thon 2019. So I just finished this readathon a couple of days ago. Today, as I'm filming this, it is actually Tuesday night, which is reminding me that I need to put the trash out. This is my second time taking part in this readathon. I took part in Thriller-A-Thon last year, and I don't remember when that was. I think it was in the fall. So it's actually been a couple of days since the readathon ended. I really enjoyed the readathon. I read 3 of the 4 books that I chose. I sort of tentatively chose 5, but I knew I wasn't going to get to the 5th one. So I really intended to try and read the first 4, and I only got to 3, but that's okay. I did a lot of vlogging. I kind of had more going on in my social life this week than I normally do, and I chose to do this readathon the instant that Contemporary-A-Thon Round 4 ended. So if you recall, I took part in Contemporary-A-Thon Round 4, and then at the very end of that final day of Contemporary-A-Thon, at the stroke of midnight, Thriller-A-Thon started. So this readathon took place between the 18th and the 24th. That's math. Simple math, but it's math. It held up pretty well. I think I would have gotten a lot more read if I hadn't been doing them back to back like that. But I wanted to take part in both of them. They're both really cool readathons that I took part in last year. And I thought, hey, let's just see what happens. So I daily vlogged for Contemporary-A-Thon, and then I filmed every day for Thriller-A-Thon, but I didn't post the videos until I did one big chunk vlog, which I posted yesterday. So, which in my world is actually today. So the books that I chose to read for Thriller-A-Thon were Mother of Invention by Caeli, Wolfson, Widger, The Haunting of Tramcar 15 by P. Djèlí Clark, and The One by John Mars. Those are the ones that I actually read. I also chose to read Bird Box by Josh Malerman, which is obviously very popular right now, and it was adapted into a big Netflix movie starring Sandra Bullock. And I thought, hey, let's just go for broke, and if I finish those, I'd also really like to read Hope Never Dies, the first book in the Obama-Biden Mysteries by Andrew Schaefer. I did not get to that book. In fact, I didn't even get to Bird Box until last night. I kind of started reading it. I read those first 3 books, and I enjoyed them. It was a really good readathon. Mother of Invention was a 3-star read for me. Haunting of Tramcar 15 was a 4-star read for me, and The One, very surprisingly, it was a 5-star read. I loved it. So, to go into a little bit more detail, starting with Mother of Invention. So this is a book that I learned about when the author, Caeli, Wolfson, Widger, was interviewed on a podcast that I listened to, which is a podcast of a radio show called Writers on Writing, which I will link to in the description below. It's a great resource if you're interested in hearing authors talk in detail about their work. This is basically a novel that is sort of a medical thriller in a way. At least that's how it's pitched. It's about a woman who runs a company called Seahorse Solutions, or the Seahorse Company or something. And she has come up with, or she and her partners have come up with a treatment plan that allows a woman, basically shortens a woman's pregnancy from 9 months to 9 weeks. And that is called the Seahorse Solution. And so this woman is portrayed as a very, very outspoken and sort of iconic, famous, celebrated feminist. She speaks out about sort of the unfair expectations that society has placed on women in terms of having children still, but also having careers and being world beaters and basically, quote unquote, doing it all. And her contention is that it's not possible for a normal human being woman to do it all. You can't do it all well. And so to sort of aid women in this quest to meet the expectations that are being placed on them by society, she and her partners in this company sort of come up with solutions like artificial breasts for breastfeeding, in addition to several other things that I'm not remembering. But basically, the 9-week pregnancy is the main thing they have to offer. It's like their big thing, and they're about to go into their first human trial, and they have 3 women who are taking part in it. It was a little unclear to me at first. I think these women were all women who were having a hard time getting pregnant or had miscarried in the past or something like that. It was a little unclear to me. And basically, this book had a really good premise, but it ended up being a little, the stakes were not high enough. The story continued and it sort of went from point A to point B to point C, but nothing big ever happened outside the story of this woman and her company and this trial and how these pregnancies are going to go. Not that that isn't a very interesting story, because it was, but I felt like there was supposed to be something bigger going on. There was involvement with the US government, and there was a whole sort of subplot about this secret government compound where people who have been termed to be a risk to national security for saying things they shouldn't be saying are put, and they try to convince them to basically revise their story and go back out into the world and stop saying the bad things that they weren't supposed to be saying. And they're given, quote, revisions. And they can either agree to those revisions or they can stay there. And that was an interesting part of the story. But it all sort of amounted to, if not less than the sum of its parts, it amounted to nothing more than the sum of its parts. This story just never super gelled for me. I liked the idea, but the stakes were never high enough. And then at the end of the day, there was a climax towards the end that I thought was a little bit implausible. I thought the security measures in place at this ultra-secret, middle-of-nowhere government installation were a little bit implausible and maybe not as good as they should have been. And I just sort of felt like I was expecting more complications as the story went on, and it remained kind of straightforward in a way that was a little disappointing to me. And then when it finally did climax and get resolved, it seemed like it all happened a little bit too easily. So in the end of the day, this was a really cool concept. And it was entertaining and I kept reading it, but it just seemed a little bit too easy. Not quite enough was at stake, and the ending was implausible in addition to being a little bit of a letdown. So I didn't love this book. I gave it 3 stars. I liked it. I think it has a beautiful cover. And, if you're intrigued by the premise, it is a good read. It's just not fantastic. And so I gave it 3 stars. The next book that I read was a novella by P. Djèlí Clark, and this is called The Haunting of Tramcar 15. This is actually the 3rd story that he has written in this sort of Egyptian steampunk alternate historical Cairo world. The first part of that world that I read was actually the 2nd thing he wrote, which was a short story in Clockwork Cairo entitled The Angel of el-Khalili, which I really enjoyed. So before I read The Haunting of Tramcar 15, I decided to go back to the beginning and read the first story that he wrote in that world, which was a story called A Dead Djinn in Cairo. A Dead Djinn in Cairo is a short story, so it didn't take up that much time, but I did read it during Thriller-A-Thon so that I could kind of get my bearings in this world again. I read that, and then I read The Angel of el-Khalili before I read The Haunting of Tramcar 15, and I really enjoyed reading them all in one sitting. I will also say that they kind of blended together because they are part of the same world, and so I'm having a hard time separating out my thoughts from one story to the other as I talk about this book. But so basically, The Haunting of Tramcar 15 takes place in an alternate version of Cairo in the early 1900s, I think 1912. I think that was the date. Basically, it's in a world where there was a famous man, I forget his name, he was like an anthropologist or something, who uncovered a doorway to the supernatural world. And so in came these otherworldly, ethereal beings that claim to be called angels, although people don't necessarily believe that they're connected to, like, God, but they're called angels, and they're very powerful, and they have to live inside these metal machine-like housing structures that they move around in, which is really, really cool and very, very steampunk. In addition to djinns, D-J-I-N-N, djinn, which they're just like incredibly large living creatures that are also very powerful. It was just very interesting, the idea that they're living in a world where someone opened a doorway and now all of these amazing things have come through. In addition, and then after they came through, they've created all this amazing technology that, of course, we didn't have in the early 1900s. So basically, in this world, there is a ghost haunting a tramcar in Cairo. And this investigator and his partner have to investigate the haunting. The tramcar itself is run by sort of like a steampunk version of artificial intelligence. There's like all of these gears in the ceiling of the tramcar that move around as like the tramcar is figuring out where to go next and stuff, and that's really cool in and of itself. But then it becomes haunted by a spirit, so they have to investigate that. And sort of parallel with this whole situation, there's a women's suffrage movement going on, which sort of played into the story in a couple of really interesting ways. And this was a very fun, lighthearted, simple story, ghost sort of investigation, paranormal investigation story that I had a lot of fun reading. So I really enjoyed this. I really enjoyed the world that it's based in. I really enjoyed the other stories that I read that are based in this world. And I gave this The Haunting of Tramcar 15 4 stars. The last book that I read for this readathon was The One by John Marrs, which is interesting. It's sort of similar to Mother of Invention in that it is kind of a speculative fiction thriller. So this is based around a company, also run by a female CEO, which has identified a gene in the human genome that will point to who you are intended to be with. Basically, the sort of pheromonal reaction and physical and hormonal reaction that you will have when you meet the one will be very, very obvious, and they can test for it by looking at your genome. So you send in a swab of your cheek or something. They do a DNA test, and they register your DNA and your gene in their system, and then when the person who is matched with you, capital M, every time it's written, matched with you, also sends in their DNA kit, then the company recognizes that you are a match for one another and you're like meant to be together, and they send you both the option to pay £10 to get the contact information and meet up. So there's a lot of different kinds of people that are entering, people who are alone, people who are already with someone but want confirmation that they're marrying the right person. And then it's really interesting, you read as the story goes on of people who, how it's broken up a lot of relationships and broken up a lot of marriages because people leave the person that they're with, sometimes happily, to go be with this other person that their DNA says they're supposed to be with instead. There are people who have lived their entire lives as heterosexuals who are suddenly being matched with people of the same gender as them, and it just causes all this drama, but it also leads to people being very happy. So the book has a really cool premise. It also has a really neat format, which is that the chapters are very, very short in a way that's very similar to The Woman in the Window by A.J. Finn. There are over 100 chapters in this book. I want to say there were 102, but somewhere hovering right around 100 chapters, which is how many chapters Woman in the Window had. So it's very easy to feel encouraged as you go because you're getting up in numbers as far as chapters go. And each chapter, it alternates from the perspective of the person that it's being written from. So it'll be from this first person, one of them, her name is Mandy. She sends in her test and gets her results back. And then the next chapter is about the next person who gets their results back. And then it's all chronological, but it alternates from one person to the next. And there were some really interesting stories in here regarding all of these different people and what they go through. One person is matched with a person who is terminally ill. Someone else is matched with someone of the same sex, even though he's engaged to be married to his girlfriend. It was all very entertaining. And I will say that in the first couple of chapters, I was a little bit like, I don't know. And maybe I was just let down by the fact that the chapters were really short and it seemed, I don't know, inconsequential or insubstantial to me or something. But I very quickly realized that I was 20% of the way through the book in my first sitting. And then I basically finished the book the next day. So I read this extremely quickly and I just devoured it. I loved this book. I also left out the fact one of the people who is matched with their, person that's meant to be the one is a serial killer in the middle of trying to finish this, incredible legacy that he wants to leave of, all of these women that he's murdering. And the depiction of how he thinks about himself and the world around him and how he kind of covers up who he is very, very interesting. It reminded me a lot of Dexter, if you've ever seen that show. He recognizes himself to be a psychopath. He studies psychopathic behavior and studies normal behavior to try and approximate having normal human emotions because he's a serial killer and he just doesn't understand the difference between right and wrong. And those sections were written really, really well. They were extremely gruesome and very, very graphic and disturbing and upsetting. And if you don't like reading really gruesome depictions of serial killers doing terrible things, first of all, why are you in Thriller-A-Thon? Second of all, maybe don't read this book because it has that in spades with this one character in particular. That said, it was just really, really interesting. And then of course he falls in love. I absolutely adored the gay relationship that was written in this. There's the two straight men who are with women and they are matched with each other, and the way they sort of grapple with that and deal with it is really, really beautiful and awesome and funny, and it totally worked for me. I think it was also aided by the fact that the book does alternate from person to person, so every time we saw them, we hadn't seen them for a while, so sort of it gave the impression of time passing, and so that relationship built in a very believable way, which is kind of a tall order and was really awesome, and I really enjoyed reading about those two guys. Everything about this book was just much better than I was expecting. It just sounded like a neat idea, but it also sounded like it had the potential to be kind of a silly story, and it ended up like I ended up totally engrossed in it and like emotionally involved. If you watched my vlog, I cried at the end of it. It had my heart pounding and I was freaking out and I couldn't stop turning pages and it was horrifying. It was all of these things. It was just a really effective thriller. I don't know, I just couldn't stop reading it and I was like so involved that I ended up giving it 5 stars. I think originally I gave it 4 stars, and then I looked back on it and I was like, why am I giving this 4 stars? I think I'm just afraid to give a thriller 5 stars, but as thrillers go, 5 stars. I adored this book. I also have heard recently that it's being adapted by Netflix, which is pretty exciting. I hope it's great, and I hope that it happens. So I highly recommend this. Again, it's very gruesome and very gory, but if you don't mind reading about serial killers, because that's in there, I really loved this book. It was really fantastic. It was my favorite of the 3, and I think it handled the medical thriller aspect and the sort of iconoclastic female CEO, head of a company willing to fight for what's right thing better than Mother of Invention did. I ended up with an average rating of 4 stars per book, which is great. So I'm going to say that Thriller-A-Thon 2019 was a good success for me. I wish I had gotten to Bird Box, but again, I'm reading it now. I also would recommend the other 2 stories by P. Djèlí Clark that I read, A Dead Djinn in Cairo, which is available as an ebook as a standalone. And the short story, The Angel of el-Khalili, is part of the really fun Egyptian steampunk anthology that I read called Clockwork Cairo, edited by Matthew Bright, which is also available as an ebook. And again, I'm just now finally starting to dip into Bird Box, and I'm really enjoying it. So those were my reads. Those were my impressions of the 3 books that I read for Thriller-A-Thon this year. I really enjoyed them. I had a great time doing this readathon. I'm really glad that it happened again. I want to thank Harriet Rosie for hosting this readathon and making it happen. I loved it last year. I loved it this year. It was really, really fun. And if you watched my vlog during the time, you'll know that I did quite a bit of cooking while this was happening and still somehow managed to read 3 books while going to work and all of that. So I'm proud of how it all went, and I'm really proud of vlogging for the last 2 weeks, and frankly, I'm super excited to not have to do that for a while, even though it is fun to do. The editing takes up some time. So that was my Thriller-A-Thon wrap-up. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any comments about the books that I read, please leave them in the comments below. I love to hear from you guys as often as possible. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button. And if you love this video and you'd like to see more content like this in the future, you can always subscribe to my channel. And then there's a little bell icon you can hit, and it'll notify you whenever I post new content. I'm trying to post on Mondays and Fridays, but like, I don't even know why I say that anymore, because lately with all these readathons and vlogs, it's like anyone's guess when my videos are going to go up. So theoretically, Mondays and Fridays, but hopefully twice a week. So that's the situation with my channel, which recently passed 100 subscribers. Thank you so much to everybody who's here. And until next time, I will be here in the dark reading. Bye, guys.